Hello, everyone. Welcome to Now Next Later for Monday, October 6th. We thank you for being here live. I know last week we had played a conversation with Brock Cassidy of NewZip, and guess what? He's back as a guest co-host this week, so he'll be joining us in about a minute. But before he does, I want to welcome our guest to continue the conversation from last week, David Wells. First thing I'll say is David watches and tunes in and comments on Now Next Later since we started. So I really, really appreciate that, David. He and I have talked a lot about the purchase market in particular, purchase lead gen, the user experience, the housing market. And so we're going to get into all that today. So Brock will jump on in a second. As he does, David Wells, CEO of Porchlight, thank you for being here.
Oh, appreciate it. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, right on. So tell us in just a few words, I want to give everybody a chance to understand what Porchlight is, what you're thinking about, what you're working on, and just generally, what are the problems you're trying to solve?
Yeah, thanks, Jeremy. We
Yeah,
are
of course.
really focused on sort of the consumer experience, and it's a long rabbit hole to figure out like why it's still the way it is in terms of if I want to go get a loan. This workflow, the tools, the legacy processes, the regulatory environment, all that stuff has made it really hard to solve for the consumer. And having a pleasant experience that's not loaded with stress and anxiety. So we've taken a couple stabs at it from different angles, and we think, we've got the secret sauce this time to get out there and fix, what is still in the e-commerce world, really the last bastion of Web 2, right? It still hasn't gotten there yet.
That's right. That's right. I think that'll actually be a big piece of the conversation. So, Brock, welcome to the show. I just was mentioning that you're the guest co-host again this week, and that this week's conversation is a continuation. So I put, some topics in the chat. As you know, I'll put different comments and takeaways in the chat, but I also want you to put your questions in there as you watch Brock and I and David chat about this. So you were mentioning, David, consumer experience. And I think the best place to start is, I've been in this industry not quite 15 years now, and all I've heard is that the consumer experience fails to live up to expectations. It fails to live up to expectations in 2012, 2010, whatever it was. It fails to live up to expectations today. So I guess we'll start with, are the consumers' expectations too high? Is the problem that they shouldn't expect something different, or is the problem that we still haven't cracked some of these very difficult handoffs and relationships across the industry in the last 15 years?
Yeah, it's definitely the latter. I mean, and I think the tolerance level for the existing experience is becoming less tolerable as the cohort of the millennials and the younger buyers are entering the home experience purchasing. They simply won't tolerate this kind of experience. Like you and I are sort of accustomed to it, and we know it's just a necessary evil to get it done. And so the problem really comes back to then why is it not fixed? Despite millions and billions of dollars and lots of attempts, there's bodies everywhere. And the problem really comes down that you have two processes to fulfill. You have a real estate process. You're going to purchase a home with a real estate agent and work with them. Then I also need to get the financing for that. And those two processes are disparate. They're not connected in any way, shape, or form. No transaction is repeatable. Each one is unique. So until somebody kind of puts some wrappers around this process and makes a repeatable process that's lender agnostic, it's going to continue to persist. And what that means is you got to get a lot of lenders to agree to do things the same way. And that's why where we are.
Excellent. Well, let's dig into that. So I want to get specific. I know Brock and I talk about this like nerds in our free time. We actually enjoy this topic, but also because it's so relevant to what you just intimated about the future of our businesses. Like mortgage lenders have to figure this out as more refinances shift to be captured and recaptured by the servicer and the large kind of servicer lender integrated platforms. That means that it leaves a greater pressure on mortgage lenders to figure out purchase and to get it right. Distributed retail and mortgage brokers have been the predominant solution. Go out in the community, drum up the referrals manually. And to your point, there is an end date to when consumers will understand that, given all of the other technology and digital tools. So if I have a pre-approval from a mortgage lender and it's digital, and I have a saved search, portal search, MLS search from my realtor, and it's largely on the web. Like you said, it's not web 3.0 or anything, but it's on the web. I haven't been able to put these together even when the real estate company and the mortgage company is one company. So can you talk us through, we want to get to next and later pretty quickly in this conversation because that's where a lot of the action is, but can you still talk us through, is there a technical obstacle? Is there a regulatory obstacle you've identified? What is, if both are digital and both are pretty commonplace now, what's been the problem? Why isn't this just an API?
It's a focus on the difference between the cost of producing something, right? What is my production costs versus how much
Okay.
am I willing to invest on the front end to make the experience positive, knowing that that person might fall out. And so I get into this chicken and the egg concept of I don't want to make any investment because of fallout. So you have the process that we have today, right? I don't want to spend $8 on a credit report because it might fall out. And the reality is that someone has to stand up and say, well, how can we rejigger the workflow and construct things in a way that, yeah, the cost might be a little higher in some fixed areas, but maybe there's some other places we can save if we just made a couple changes. And so one of the big things I would point out, Jeremy, is the issue of being non-technical, being a little cultural. Let's
Okay.
talk about the word pre-approval. What does that mean? That's a conditional promise, right? The problem is the consumer's mentality that means is I'm good to go. I'm going to make an offer and we're going to buy this house. But what you find out is the underwriting hasn't actually occurred, right? So I go to make this a pre-approval, right? And I'm not really approved. I haven't been to AUS. My income, asset, debt, and employment haven't been verified. So now I have this experience that's filled with stress and anxiety that's happening post-offer, right? When I thought I was already good to go. And so that experience is a letdown, right? You've overpromised and underdelivered right out of the gate.
Yeah,
So Brock,
I think I
yeah,
mentioned
go ahead.
here last week, Jeremy, that the 40 plus different lenders we work with in all our different channels, basically all have record numbers of on hold purchase clients, right? They got a pre-approval and then something, but not a closed transaction. So I was kind of laughing when David was saying that because it's so true. The clients think that they are ready to go. They have their piece of paper. And it's not necessarily, it's not squarely anyone's fault. It's not squarely the lender's fault. They did do that. They did pre-approve them. It's not squarely the realtor's fault. They showed them a couple houses and the client lost interest. But there is just, it's the connective tissue between, which is what I'm always excited to talk about, where, that's why with our partners, we add in a bunch of kind of nurture campaigns and things along the way so that consumers know where they are, and even human conversations with our concierge team. But our process aside, that conversation needs to happen a lot more often of where exactly, the pizza tracker of where the consumer is in the transaction, because the pre-approval means very little at this point. We always look at those pre-approval numbers being up and up and up week over week, but the count of transactions really hasn't been very often in the past couple of years. So yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that, David. I think that's a huge point of like, you got the clients in the door, you generated the lead, you generated the pre-approval, but the pre there is pretty important.
Yeah, so
That's
if
right.
we control for a standard, David, if we said, okay, pre-qual, pre-approval, verified approval doesn't mean the same thing to everybody, and it's very difficult for agents to trust, back to the cultural issue you mentioned, it's very difficult for agents to trust which is which when they're putting the deal on the line with the offer and the timing and the guarantees they're going to make for contingencies and other things in the contract. Let's control for that for a second and say we're talking about a truly underwritten conditional promise. So not the verbal version, not the LO printing it out version, but underwriter looked at it, still conditional to your point, because we don't have a property yet, but truly underwritten. So at Rocket, that was called a verified approval letter, a VAL. Other places call it different things, but it is a true regulatory pre-approval for those other categories. If that was the case, can we walk through what changes or doesn't from the user experience? If that was ubiquitous and everybody had one, does that solve some of our cultural problem, none of our cultural problem? Do we still have technical obstacles? Like, where are we if that is the coin of the realm?
It's a piece, right? It's just
Okay.
one piece. We can't point at any one piece and shoot a bullet and fix this thing. Like we're gonna have to stack up a bunch of solutions and integrate them. But what
Okay.
you just referred to is essentially a self-service portal to AUS, right? If I can get a customer direct to AUS, get their income repped and warranted, get their assets repped and warranted, then I go make an offer, that's a whole different experience, right? There's a little box on every form that says loan contingency. Imagine in a world, just really imagine here, where people
Yeah.
aren't checking that box. They're competing with all cash. And these guys like Ribbon who are charging at a point and a half to make an all cash offer, really because nobody wants to undertake the work to get you pre-underwritten. So I see that future. It's going to take a while to get there, and we're going to solve one problem at a time. And I think that a lot of the issues that have caused people to fail at this problem is they've started solving either in the middle of the problem or the front of the problem. The problem's a capital markets problem. Until you solve the back end aggregators and make them happy with the files you're sending them, you're not going to be able to solve anything because they hold the pot of gold. And I think that's sort of the different mindset we've taken in attacking the problem from the back to the front. So your consumer might not see stuff right up front, right? Because you first have to corral all these lending processes, get a couple of lenders who are courageous enough to show rates. And then you can begin to bind together a universal process to access multiple lenders, that is agnostic of their underwriting or overlay criteria, because you've already been through AUS or LPA, and you have a good hold that this customer is verified across income, asset, debt, and employment, and that this file you're about to send is compliant with AUS, and you're off and running.
Yeah, right on. So Brock, let's unpack that for a second, because I heard two pieces, but I want to get your perspective on the real estate side as well, which is if we give the power to the consumer and we pull forward the pre-approval, the verified approval, and we hand it to consumers and have them empowered to shop with their agent and in parallel find a lender because they know they have some level of approval, then we've knocked down a bunch of the obstacles, or at least some of the obstacles that we started out with here in our thought experiment, what David was saying about where we can go in the future. At the same time, it follows that if you can do that from an agnostic perspective, a lender should be able to do that with their preferred real estate partner or their affiliate real estate partner. So like, walk us through, Brock, your impression of like, where are we still not finding the courage to use David to actually put this into play if it exists or could exist?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's a lot of different layers, but I think the most important one is kind of like the order of operations of the workflow, however you want to think about it. So, I ran the partnerships for a company that had that product, EasyKnock. Then we acquired Ribbon, who also had that product, and both ceased to exist at this point. But there's still people in that space, Calc and Orchard and Up Equity and others, right, that have similar, slightly different structure products. Some of them are very different structure products, but to get at that same problem of like contingency busting, so that the client can buy and sell. So we as a real estate company have had to go lender by lender and kind of workflow by workflow, think about where we can use those products and where we can't. Some of our lenders have those, some of them don't. So it's pretty complicated from that standpoint. But I think the right way to think about it is, and it's kind of natural now, as we've seen, like New American Funding has launched their own cash offer product. I don't know the status of it today, but they did that for just this reason, right? And Rocket had done various pilots with it, and other direct to consumer lenders particularly had done it. And I know Fairway has experimented or done a pilot with one, probably lots of others, right? Those are just some I know offhand. And so like those lenders are thinking of it as an ecosystem play, right? We generated that we either own or have real estate partners. We either own or have like bridge products or like specialty product partners, but they're all keeping it in their ecosystem, right? They're kind of world building what's going to happen for the consumer. So that's how we've built our whole business, is let's build it around the lenders, co-branded or white labeled with the appropriate, accreditation and compliance pieces. But like really it's their brand, it's their process, and they can choose where to put it. I think that's the only way it works, because the lending process is so much more regulated than the other processes of like whether it's personal lending or whether it's real estate or whether it's, really any other part of the transaction. So I'm a big fan of building it around the lender's process. And that's obviously easier if the lender's generating the lead first and they kind of are driving it through the process, and a little bit harder if it starts somewhere else from a agent or a fintech tool or something else. But that's kind of how I think about it.
Yeah, David, maybe that's a perfect segue into next, because what I'm hearing Brock say and what you've kind of said is whether you have an agnostic verified approval or you have a lender that got the lead first and set up everything, let's call it the right way. What you're, David, saying, I think, is that the next step for the industry is that the cash product shouldn't be necessary, because you should be solid enough on the credit piece that the only remaining thing is the collateral. And if you have the data and you have the approval, wouldn't then what's next is, why do we need cash? We can just treat the mortgage financing as cash, assuming that we have everything we need and we close it fast enough. Is that an accurate, I mean, what's your take on that, David?
No, I mean, that's the holy grail, right? It's the ultimate buy now, pay later, right? Affirm, Klarna, press a button, buy something, and then the financing is set up in the background. To Alan's point in the chat, there is these overlay criteria that makes each of these lenders unique, right? I have this special sauce that lets me analyze risk. And he's, you're talking about AUS just being, the first part of the process. The second part is that, human or some soon to be AI guy overlaying those criteria in real time against a lender who wants to take the file, an aggregator on the back end who has this specific profile that they're looking for in the files they're buying to build their MBS portfolio. So this idea of rejiggering the workflow to just make this better, right? There's still going to be people involved. There's still going to be work on the back end to do, but to fix the consumer experience, if we restructure workflow, and I mean, you mentioned, Jeremy, that, for instance, we don't even start underwriting in some of these places until we have the collateral appraised, right? So like, if we could just change some of the workflow, you can dramatically improve consumer experience.
So let's talk a little bit about that, since we're now thinking through how to control for this, how to solve for it, kind of where the industry is going. So let's do all those things. We put all those in play. We find a courageous company to partner with. We find courageous real estate agents, to use your words, to partner with. I love that. Now, what is that consumer experience look like? So talk to us a little bit about the differentiation that could offer if these pieces were done the way we've just described for the first half of the show.
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple of pieces that have to happen in terms of sequencing. And from a consumer experience, let me just give you one that's like a really big challenge, right? Putting the PPE in the hands of the consumer, right? Sounds real simple. Like Expedia did it for travel. Why can't we do it for mortgage? Well, this underwriting criteria and stuff comes to play. So if I just want to bring transparency to pricing, right, and bring, lender direct pricing, I've got the aggregator pricing sheet in my hands and I want to get it into the consumer's hands with rate, price, and feature all set up so that they can filter, and like any modern marketplace would work, right? That's a big piece that needs to happen on the front end. And that's, currently the job of a loan officer, right? They sit in a chair, they take down these files, they look up the rates, and they have to explain it and understand why this particular product is right for your situation. The house you're buying, in the county you're buying it, it's attached, it's detached, whatever it is that makes that loan file, have a special lender is needed. That lookup environment needs to exist. And so building this kind of self-service portal to AUS that gets them on the journey, that's building the PPE, that building direct to consumer access to the PPE is kind of what we're working on. The idea of embedding that in an MLS browsing experience is kind of leg two. So if you'd imagine, like when you're browsing the MLS, you should be able to browse in the context of your loan program, not some calculator, right? You're literally using the overlay criteria. As you move from MLS listing to MLS listing, that loan program is calculating your real-time buying power into the monthly payment and to any other thing. If you want to look at what an ARM is, and that's an ARM that you're actually qualified for, you should be able to look at your MLS listings in the context of your loan.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's later, by the way.
Well, the reason I like that picture is because it makes sense to consumers. So I'm always a fan of innovation where we know the user is going to inherently understand it as second nature or automatically, because it does make sense and because they've experienced it in these other areas of their lives. So that, I think, is a great point. But I think the second point you made is even more important, which is when you give people tools, how they use the tools, in what order, also tells you data generation process, interactive, so to speak, to where you can initiate the AI chat frequently asked questions product that you own because you can see that somebody's struggling on a screen. You can actually bridge some of the gaps of shopping when somebody pauses or stops. You know, just this weekend, I had a pair of shoes in my shopping cart on a website and I decided not to buy them, but I got 5 emails from Adidas over the next 5 hours being like, your shoes are in the cart, you should buy them. Your shoes are in the cart, you should buy them, bringing me back to the site. We don't have a lot today that I've seen that brings people back to the app, that brings people back to the site, that brings people back to the portal, other than their own motivation, other than their own curiosity. Nothing we're doing. Do I have that right, Brock? What am I missing?
No, I think you have it right. I was gonna say, like, the consumer doesn't know they have all these problems, right? Like that's the reality of it. That's kind of what the workflow issue is. They'll go to the wrong person for, it's not their fault. It's a super complicated process they do once. Maybe this is the first time for a lot of them in their lives, right? Maybe they do it 3 or 4 times in their life, right? So it's that's where it gets tricky, and we do have to think of it as not just B2B partnerships, but positioning things for the consumer to use, right? Amazon makes it really easy to change the financing type if you want to use a firm, right, or whatever. So that's totally the right mindset. I think where it gets hung up is in the now and maybe even the next. Is kind of the order that the client goes in, where they don't know they have this huge glaring problem with, maybe it's with their current house and the mortgage company hasn't underwritten, the equity that they're going to get out properly or at all. Or maybe it's with the house they're going to find that they haven't even found yet. Maybe it's maybe they're going to have that contingency issue because they're buying a new home that's only in the sheetrock stage and going to take 60 more days, right? So there's all these nuances that we can't possibly expect consumers to know, and debatably even, every loan officer, every real estate agent to know. And so I think, like, I love the idea of, and we've taken this in our product roadmap many times, is showing the same things to the consumer. The right way to show it to the consumer is often the right way to show it to everyone, right? And so if we can get to a place where there is the super app, whether it's one the lender builds themselves, whether it's a third party one, whatever it is, that gives the client the full context, that's certainly the right place to land. And you see the integration plays between real estate, title, and lending all the time, but most of them still have the 3 different systems. So that's where I think it gets really tricky. I think it's it all has to be with the mindset that the consumer actually can identify the problems they have, unless we're going to solve them without them even realizing it.
No, I think, Brock, that's really important what you're bringing up, because this is why you, NewZip, and myself are on the same strategy. You can't do that. You'll never get the consumer. You know who needs to be doing that is high schools and colleges, and they're not. And it's sad. And a little nod to Brian Vo and the FinLocker product, right? What he's trying to do. So what we've realized is that the only person that really cares about that is the real estate agent, right? They're going through these transactions 7 times a year. They know all that. And so you need to lean on them a little to help their customer, right? Why they've just been able to say, the financing is not my problem. When you give me a rating, remember, it was the loan officer that made this whole thing shitty. So yeah, give him this too, but make sure I'm great. But the reality is, it's the totality of the purchase experience includes financing. And so the real estate agent doesn't need to be a loan officer, but they do need to be, they're very vested. They want to get their commission check. And if it's, somebody didn't get a flood cert signed off, and so we got 10 more days before I get my commission, I'm invested to try to help you. And I think that's the person that we need to work through. And then we can get into, are they durable? Are they going to outlast AI? And, but right now the real estate agent's the place to go for that, in my opinion, of course.
Agreed.
Well, can we talk about that? Because I think that is a key piece of this, which is there is still going to be a quarterback to the transaction from an emotional and logistical and human perspective. And what I think we've seen is there's kind of 5 or 6 licensed professionals all fighting for their turf, for their piece. It's the real estate agent, it's the mortgage loan officer, it's the title agent, it's the appraiser, it's the inspector. In some cases, the attorney, there's an insurance company, maybe an insurance agent involved, there's a financial advisor involved. And one of the reasons we continue to have these costs is because we continue to have licensed, credentialed experts all across this transaction. So I think later comes, with this exciting experience and with this technology, a convergence or a confluence of the experience. And, David, you just mentioned the real estate agent is probably the one likely to win that. But I also want to ask you about the technology perspective as well. It's the agent, but then it's also right now I have like 7 to 10 different apps in my financial life, and I'm already a homeowner and I have all those. Are we going to see a confluence of the technology here? Is it going to be branded by the highest profile brand and all these other things are going to kind of happen behind the scenes? Or is it still going to be, to Brock's point, you got to kind of piece together 3 or 4 different applications and brands and experiences, which I think has been our roadblock this whole time. So how do you see it happening from a confluence of both the culture and the technology coming together in the same place?
Yeah, I mean, the word is marketplace, right? I mean, that's the platform that kind of
Okay.
unifies all the parties behind a consistent process. And I mean, what Zillow and Redfin, they're working on it, right? This is not, the idea isn't the big idea to put everybody on a single platform. It's the execution. I think those guys are going to be successful. I think it's a really smart idea. You bolt on, a lending process to an MLS browsing experience, and you get the 2 parties to start to work together. It's going to take some time. And even then, they're not really providing a shopping experience because it's a single back-ended lender, right? You're not getting a marketplace experience when you want to look at rate and price. So that's not really the best for the consumer.
Yeah, and I think the other complication on the lending side is that it's different by channel, right? So if you're a classic retail loan officer who's got 5 great real estate agent referral partners, it's a very intricate process to decide who gets a very manual sort of in their head process of decide who they even want to work with when they generate the lead, or if the realtor generated the lead to make sure it stays with them. So there's, it's a lot cleaner when a lot of the reason I think we've seen like New American Funding and Rocket and some other Loan Depot better be able to sort of start the ecosystem plays a little faster than is because they do get first touch on the client, and then they can sort of protect their ecosystem, right? But I think that later has to be that the rest of the industry also gets that same ecosystem experience, that they whether whoever the first touch is, that the client has access to all the right things. I just think it gets really tricky between, is it joint ventures between these companies? Is it one company that's the hero and the other ones are the partners? Or is it a bunch of equal companies who sort of just agree to do what they do and follow a really intricate process and actually build it together? That's what we're always aiming for, but with all the different partners we have. But there's so many different flavors of it but I think the later has to be that you get that integration where it is that Amazon experience, Airbnb experience, whatever, that you can just the right things are there to add on, right?
Yeah, I love that. David, can you kind of tie it all together for us from now to next to later in that marketplace that you both just described? Is there anything that you're looking for in terms of either indicators or milestones or things that our audience can be watching for to know we're on the right track? What's the next gate, or what's the next hurdle, or what's the next milestone that you have in your mind to say, all right, when this happens, that'll be an indicator that we're on the right track? Or in your work, what are you taking on that gets us to that later?
Wow, that's a great question. It's me getting to market and getting a transaction across my platform, right? I
There you
mean,
go. That's a good one.
if I can build a consumer credit profile that's agnostic of any one lender and allow that person to use that credit profile to shop for rate, price, and feature for mortgage in an automated way, I mean, that's it. That's the next milestone. The transactional experience itself might not be that great, but at least I've gotten to true transparency in pricing prior to making an offer on a home. Like, that's a great first step.
All right. Well, we'll end it there, and we'll definitely have you back, because I think this is going to be one of the most dynamic areas of the industry over the next year, is as we see people converging. If rates continue either to maintain relatively similar profile or even go down a little bit further in the next year, we are going to have a massive focus on front-end shopping, front-end portal, and where the pre-approval fits in that process. So we'll definitely have you back. David, thanks again for joining us on Now Next Later. We're really excited to talk about this, and we'll definitely have you back.
Yeah,
Thank you,
David.
Brock.
Brock, thanks for being here as the co-host. Next week, I believe Sasha will be back. We'll have Ike Surrey, the CEO of Funding Shield, as our guest. And then we're hoping to have Sasha and Brock back in Las Vegas for MBA Annual. I think Robbie Chrisman may join us too. So 2 more exciting weeks coming up between October 13th with Ike and October 21st in Las Vegas. So thank you, everybody. Thanks, David, and tune in next week.